So I always like to set a little bit of expectations about what we're going to be discussing. There's a lot about banking that I can go into, but I don't want this to become a talk about how do you get a loan. I want to focus on what do careers look like in banking, and how do you get involved? And I'll start off with a little bit of my story. We'll then talk about the values at Atlantic Union Bank. I've only ever worked for a single bank, Atlantic Union, but I've held many different roles in the course of my time there, up to my most recent, which is a relationship manager in the business lending department. Um, I'll talk about how AUB has invested in me. And I know from some of my colleagues in the banking industry, there are a number of programs out there to take advantage of if you're in banking and you're looking to grow. Also, they're great ones if you're looking to get involved with banking and you're going through some type of interview process or onboarding process. You want to ask about these. Again, I'm going to speak from the Atlantic Union experience, but these are available to a lot of bankers. So if that's something of interest, I'd dive in and I can certainly speak more to it. And then finally, what does community investment look like? Why are banks around? Why have we, for the most part, as an industry, withstood the test of time? Why banking in general? So we're going to go through those areas, but these are the four main points that, if anything, I hope everyone leaves with a little bit more clarity on. So again, I'm going to dive into my journey. As Laura had mentioned in my bio, I started 10 years ago, June of 2014 with the bank. I was an intern in the retail side of the bank. Specifically, you walk into a bank, the person who's handling the money, they chat with you a little bit, you deposit your check and you leave, or you withdraw some cash. That's why I started out as an intern. I got into banking because I pivoted out of the healthcare sector. I originally thought I wanted to become a doctor like my father. Turns out I don't like blood, so that doesn't go very far. And a lot of the medical courses I was taking and lab work required dissection, different things of that nature. And I realized I wasn't as passionate about it as I thought I was going into college. Pivoted, took economics just because I enjoyed some of the professors I had no idea what to do with it. Um, did a little political work on both sides of the aisle, and then decided that wasn't the path I wanted to go either. So my senior year had an internship with the bank, and June 2015 had a job lined up straight out of college. I think I graduated May 28th and started June 1st. A lot early on, and still to this day, it's customer service focused. Um, there are other jobs, and I'll dive into what I've seen some of the people I've hired go through to get to those back office roles: marketing, wire departments, treasury departments. There's a number of different avenues within banking, and especially the bigger the bank, the more roles there are. But I like to caveat it with my perspective. I've always been the customer focused side. So it's building relationships. There typically is a sales component, different degrees to that, especially as my career has progressed. I'm certainly in a heavier sales role. But at the end of the day, it's working with people, finding solutions within the banking sector. There's a bank on every corner. And I'm going to go into how you may differentiate yourself for those who are interested. Um, a financial service advisor, other terms for this role are universal banker, you'll sometimes hear. But again, they're still customer focused. However, they're doing some type of loan work. And it's typically not a mortgage lender like you're going to buy your first home. Vehicle loans, home equity lines, home equity loans, opening of bank accounts. That's the type of work you're dealing with. I will say there's typically not a lot of emphasis on outside networking. The bank is typically driving relationships to you to further develop. The marketing department has a lot to do with that. Branch location has a lot to do with that. But again, there's not that expectation of being outside of the branch. I will tell you, for a lot of the people I mentor now in that role, I encourage them to do some form of networking and to talk with their bosses about how they can get out into the community. That's a way to jumpstart your career, because there are every role is numbers based. And I want to pause. I see a hand up. And how could you first
It,
pronounce your name for me?
it's Gigi. And when
Gigi,
you
the floor
say
is yours. Thank you.
financial service, are you talking to people that do just specifically like the personal loans, or are you talking about the people that are, when you go into a bank, you see tellers and you see people sitting at desk? Are you talking about those people?
Correct. So sometimes the people at the desk are also the people at teller lines. That's shifted. There used to be a distinction between the two. A lot of banks actually, those people, when you go in to just cash your check, are now financial service advisors. They can take your deposit. They also can open a bank account or do a consumer loan, like I mentioned, a vehicle loan or a home equity loan.
Okay.
There are still banks out there that they are separate positions. However, at least I can speak for Atlantic Union. We have phased out a lot of those strictly teller roles, the kind of the order taking roles. And now, if you're working with someone on the teller line, you've already had that conversation about you want to explore, a money market and what that means. Why not just put up a sign that says, next window? There's still someone up there, but you walk with that client to the desk and have a more private conversation off the teller line. So they're a lot of times they're one and the same now. But you're
Okay.
correct. They're typically at a desk. They may have their own room, they may not. A lot of times managers will have an actual door to their office. But did that answer your question, Gigi?
Yes, thank you.
Um, the next part of my journey, this was January of 2018. I became an assistant manager. Um, a lot of the reason why I moved into that role was because I was such a high producer of loans. I've always been passionate on the lending side. There's a lot more creativity that gets involved in education as well. A lot of people can Google the interest rate and see what the APY is. They can look that up. They'll look at different banks. It's still confusing how to go through the loan process. And frankly, knowing what documents to provide, how to make it so that way you're not wasting time and documents are becoming outdated. That's where I've thrived. Um, and I believe the lending side and then building relationships off of that is what got me into the assistant manager role. I was then training others. Um, I'm a big believer, though, even when I was what's called a financial service advisor two, they're just a higher grade of that desk person. Um, I was always connecting with my manager and discussing how do I start acting like the next step. She was giving me opportunities to coach some of the newer financial service advisors. Um, so I highly encourage have that conversation with your manager, even from the beginning. I think with my interview with my manager, I even mentioned, this is where I'm thinking I want to go in the company. I don't know if that's where I'll end up, but this is where I am. Are you able to help me get there? And we talked through what that training would look like. Um, I did such a great job as an assistant manager. Both on the lending side and training side, especially, but also on the audit and just regulatory side of the banking at that point with that assistant manager role that they moved me up to a branch manager. And then from there, successive higher levels of management. Typically, what it means is I had a larger staff. Uh, there was more risk reward for the bank of moving me into those later on roles. Um, they were higher deposit branches. They had more relationships to manage. Um, Growing those teams and being successful, eventually I moved into the commercial lending side. Now, there's every bank has a different definition of what commercial lending is. A lot of banks and like ours, branch managers can make business loans. They're typically smaller, they're typically less complicated. There's typically some form of real estate or vehicle, some type of collateral involved. Oftentimes, they're not doing lines of credit, or at least not very complex ones. That's where I moved into in that space. And again, I like the lending side. There was more of a challenge, and I enjoyed that. Eventually, working both pieces, I decided I do want to move into a heavier commercial lending role, and for the time being, give up some of the management's uh, expectation that the bank had. I dive fully into the commercial role, and that's where As you see, in 2022, I became a business banking relationship manager. Similar to the ones before, there are different levels of that. And technically now I am a business banking relationship manager level 2. All it means is I'm more experienced. I've proven I can thrive in that type of environment. Um, I want to pause. Any questions about that journey in my experience? Perfect. I'll continue on. Even in my current role, I'm not managing a branch location with clients walking in. Now I am far more focused on going out and bringing business to the bank.